My name is Lucas Hammond. I have 34 years. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and what was supposed to be a peaceful holiday turned into an abyss that revealed who the people around me really were. I used to believe I knew my family, my wife, and even myself. But it only took one weekend, any holiday, for everything to collapse. No, this isn't just about betrayal. It's about abandonment, manipulation, and a kind of cruelty that hides in small, silent gestures. But I'm not here to victimize myself. I'm here to tell you how it all started and what I decided to do afterwards. It all started in a rainy Wednesday afternoon on the eve of Thanksgiving. I drove almost 5 hours to the country house that belongs to my wife's family, Tessa, located on the outskirts of Blue Ridge, a property inherited from her grandmother, and which we use to gather the family on commemorative dates. I took with me a box of bottles of local wine, ingredients for dinner, my famous sweet potato casserole that everyone loves, and some gifts for my nephews. In my mind, that holiday would be another milestone of family unity. But when I arrived, I realized something was wrong. The house was completely empty. No cars in the garage, no smell of food in the air, no music echoing from the room. But what really gave me goosebumps was the silence. A thick, almost aggressive silence, as if the house was waiting for me. I entered with the key that Tessa had given me 2 weeks earlier, and soon saw a figure sitting in the leather armchair in the living room, near the unlit fireplace. It was her stepfather, Gerald, a man with whom I have always had a respectful but distant relationship. He was there, with a blanket over his shoulders, slowly turning in a rocking chair, as if nothing strange was happening. Next to me on the coffee table, a brown envelope caught my attention. My name written in hurried letters. I opened it with a shaking hand. The note, direct and icy, said, "We went to Texas to spend the holiday with my cousin. Gerald needs care. You understand? I'll see you on Monday. T." Without love, without sorry for not warning, without the slightest explanation. Just a cold order to take care of a sick man I barely knew. The light mint smell in the room now made me sick. Gerald stopped rocking his chair, turned his face slightly, and in a low voice said, "I guess it's just the two of us this year, isn't it, lad?" I didn't know what to answer. It was as if my mouth had lost the ability to form words. The naturalness with which he said that made me understand that he knew. I knew everything. I knew it before I set foot there. I sat on the arm of the couch, still in shock. I looked around as if it were possible to find some logic there, some clue that would make it less absurd. But all I found was emptier. Empty in the hallways, empty in the refrigerator. No preparation for a family holiday. It was as if they had never planned to spend the holiday there. As if everything had been designed so that I would be exactly where I was, isolated and betrayed. I picked up my cell phone and tried to call Tessa. He called until it went to voicemail. I tried again and again. Nothing. I opened the messaging app and sent a short text. "Where are you exactly? What's going on?" Not even displayed. I felt my stomach drop. Gerald then stood up with some difficulty, leaning on his cane, an object that, until then, I had considered a symbol of fragility, but which at that moment seemed more like a scepter of dominance. He walked to the kitchen and started going through the drawers. "At least you brought some food, right?" he said, without looking at me. I replied that I had only brought specific ingredients for dessert. "So we'll have to make do with what we have," he grumbled. But when I opened the refrigerator, the scene was bleak. Expired milk, an open can of pickles, remains of old pizza. No turkey, no potatoes, no prep. My hand shook as I opened Instagram, almost like an involuntary act, searching for any sign of Tessa. And there it was, a photo posted 3 hours ago. She, smiling, next to a man I didn't know, with a sunset filter and the caption, "Gratitude for being with those who matter this holiday. Family by renewal." My blood ran cold. I enlarged the image. It wasn't Texas. It was a seaside resort, with architecture typical of Florida hotels. This man was her ex-boyfriend, Patrick, someone she said she didn't even keep in touch with. She had left me to look after Gerald while reborn romantically with her ex at a luxury resort. I showed the photo to Gerald. He analyzed it calmly, then nodded as if confirming an old suspicion. "She and Patrick have been back together since the end of September," he said. in a neutral tone. And they didn't want you around to get in the way of starting over. I was paralyzed. My face burned. The words echoed like punches. And did you know? I asked. He responded with just a tired look. I've seen more than I should in the last few months, but no one listens to me anymore. The world around me was spinning slowly. I got up, stumbling a little, and walked to the bathroom. I washed my face, took a deep breath. I thought about everything I gave up for this relationship. The rejected freelancing, the sleepless nights to help with her family's business, the trips canceled due to lack of funds, everything to be betrayed with the coldness of a message note. When he left, Gerald was sitting at the kitchen table with a black folder open in front of him. "Before you think about leaving," he said, "I think you need to see this." I opened the folder without understanding. Inside there was bank statements, receipts, handwritten notes, and something even stranger, a medical report with his name on it. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, running out of patience. "Because they left me here to die," he replied. "But I have my own plans, and maybe you want to be part of them." I stood there for a while, looking at that open folder as if it were a safe revealing ancient secrets. The papers were organized with almost obsessive precision. Gerald, the man I thought was living on the autopilot of old age, looked at me with lively, intense eyes, as if every second of that conversation had been carefully rehearsed. "Read this first," he said, pushing a recently dated medical report toward me. I'm no expert, but it wasn't difficult to understand the diagnosis. Liver cancer, advanced stage, guarded prognosis. 3 to 4 months to live, according to the oncologist who signed. The heartbeat faster. "Did they know that?" I asked. Gerald nodded. "Yes, they knew. Tessa was in the office with me when I heard the news. She cried a little, hugged me, and said we would do the best with the time we had left." He laughed dryly. 2 days later, she was buying tickets with Patrick and arranging with me how I would spend the holiday. Indignation took me over completely. "This is monstrous," I muttered. Gerald just said, "That's what happens when you let empty people take care of important things." He pushed more papers my way. See the dates, see the values. And there it was. Bank transfers to Tessa's account, debits on cards that weren't his, cash withdrawals that he would never be physically able to make on his own. They've been draining me for months. They use my name, my credit history, even my health insurance to fuel this lifestyle you're seeing now on Instagram. I looked at the most recent statement. There was a purchase at a luxury hotel in Naples, Florida, dated 2 days earlier. "So, that's where they are," I muttered. "Yes," he replied. "And they think they're going to inherit this house, my investments, my retirement, everything. But I have other plans. And you, Lucas, you're an important part of them." I slowly sat down at the table. I was still in shock, but my mind was starting to work. Gerald closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. "What I'm proposing isn't cheap revenge. It's justice. They don't deserve anything they expect to receive. And you don't deserve what you're going through." He removed a small wooden box from the closet, opened it with a key he took from around his neck, and revealed a flash drive. "Here's everything. Audios, videos, call logs, recordings of discussions, copies of emails. Everything that can prove that Tessa and Patrick not only neglected me, but used me as a walking ATM." "And what do you want from me?" I asked, already fearing the answer. "Help. Help with scanning, organizing, putting together a timeline that will convince any judge that they shouldn't get a dime. I also want you to help me prepare my farewell, but in my own way. I want to die as a man, not as a burden. And if you do this for me, I leave a significant portion of my assets to you. Legally, armored, with my signature and with witnesses." I felt a lump form in my throat. It all seemed like something out of a movie script, but it was real. The folder in my hands was real. The pain in that man's eyes was real, and the emptiness I felt too. "Why trust me?" I asked. "Because you were betrayed too. Because I saw how you got here, with that look of someone who believed a sweet lie. Because you still have decency in your eyes, Lucas. And that's rare." I took a deep breath. I got up from the chair, walked around the kitchen, washed my face again. I needed to think. When I returned, he was still waiting for me patiently. "Okay," he said finally. "But if we're going to do this, let's do it right. I want to see it all, from the beginning. Gerald smiled for the first time. A small, tired but sincere smile. We spent the rest of the afternoon scanning documents, making copies of statements, organizing files into folders on my laptop. Gerald showed me how he had been recording the symptoms of the disease from the beginning, the times when the medicines were not administered correctly, the days when Tessa or Patrick made up excuses not to take him to appointments. With each new item, the revolt grew more. Not only did they neglect him, they sabotaged him slowly, waiting for the disease to do the dirty work for them. It got dark quickly in that isolated house in the mountains. The cold of the night crept in through the cracks in the windows, and I heated up some canned soup while Gerald retired to his room. Before going to bed, he said, "Tomorrow we're going to go through things in the garage. There are more important documents there, and I want to show you something that could change everything." I agreed and let him rest. Alone in the kitchen, with my laptop open in front of me, I read some of the email transcripts that Gerald had obtained. There were messages exchanged between Tessa and Patrick, laughing about how the old man was still holding his own, how they could sell the house after he left, and how maybe I wouldn't even question anything if I was recognized as a good son-in-law. The blatant contempt with which they spoke of me made me feel sick. I closed the notebook and looked out the window. Outside, just the darkness of the mountains. But for the first time since I arrived, I felt like I was in the right place. This wasn't about a broken marriage anymore. It was about rebuild my dignity, helping a man achieve the dignified end he was denied, and ensuring that those who caused so much harm did not go unpunished. The next morning, I woke up before the sun rose. I made coffee, prepared some toast, and took it to Gerald's room. He was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with a pile of shoeboxes beside him. "Up early," I commented. He replied with a firm look. "Today is the day we turn the tide." The shoeboxes stacked next to Gerald's bed seemed harmless at first glance, but all he had to do was remove the lid from the first one for me to realize the depth of that silent operation. Inside there were tax documents, decades-old correspondence, small notebooks with meticulous notes, dates, names, amounts. Gerald wasn't just a sick man, he was a sick man. Prepared. "These notebooks here," he said, running his hand over the worn spirals, "are my financial diary, and emotional too. Here is everything I've ever paid for since I joined this family." There were records of college tuition for Patrick, luxury trips paid for Tessa and Elaine, her mother, renovations made to the house that was now their dream. On each page, a line about the cost and another about the impact. "What I spent for affection," he murmured, "turned into currency to discard me." With all this material in hand, we created a digital folder system on my notebook and also saved everything on an external hard drive that Gerald kept in a safe hidden behind a bookshelf. Inside the safe, in addition to the HD, there was something that made me recoil, a short weapon, kept inside a velvet box, next to a handwritten will, different from what we had already read. "This is just for emergencies," he said when he noticed my gaze. "But I hope we never have to." We spent the morning cataloging images, recording short videos with Gerald's statements explaining the chronology of the events. I took care of the technical part, the light, the angles. He spoke with lucidity and authority, even with a weakened voice. They need to hear it from me, clearly. No distorted versions. During one of the breaks, I received a call from my sister, worried that I hadn't given her any news. I invented that I was on a retreat to rest, and that I would explain everything later. I still didn't know how to tell her the extent of what was happening. Gerald insisted that we go to the garage, where he said he had hidden even more sensitive documents. We crossed the cold yard. He leaned on my arm and his cane. Inside the garage, under a grimy tarp, was an old closet, locked with a combination padlock. He punched in the numbers with shaky but steady fingers. When the door opened, I almost choked on the dust and smell of aged wood. Inside were property purchase contracts, records of a bank account in the Virgin Islands, proof of donations and funds invested in names that Tessa and Patrick were completely unaware of. "This house, for example," he said, pointing to a deed. "It's not in my name or my family's name. It's in the name of a holding company I created years ago. They think they're going to inherit everything, but in fact they don't even have the right to the mailbox." I was amazed at the level of planning. "And is all this already legally protected?" I asked. "Yes. with the support of Patricia, my lawyer. I just needed someone like you to finalize the last details. It was all so surreal that I started to wonder if this was really my life. Just a week before, I was planning to prepare my special dish, pour wine, take photos with the family together. Now, I was an accomplice, no, ally, from a man who was, step by step, dismantling the castle of lies where an entire family lived. After lunch, improvised with bread, cheese, and some salami, Gerald handed me a letter. It was sealed with red wax, the old-fashioned way. I want you to deliver this personally to Patricia tomorrow. It's the final version of my will, with the changes we agreed on. And don't worry, your name is there, with guaranteed rights. I took the letter and placed it inside my backpack as if it were a diamond. Gerald continued. Tomorrow she will also bring the form for the new medical power. I want you to be responsible for making decisions when I can no longer. They won't like it, but they won't be able to argue. At this point, my heart beat faster. Are you sure about this? I asked. Do you really want me to take on all of this? I'm just the betrayed husband. Gerald smiled. That's precisely why. Because you know what it's like to be discarded. And because, despite everything, you're still here. In the afternoon, while he was getting some rest, I got busy scanning the garage documents. Each paper was a piece of a dark puzzle. Denied health insurance registrations, contracts cancelled for financial reasons, while Tessa was shopping for very expensive handbags. When Gerald woke up, I showed him a spreadsheet I had created based on the documents, with dates, values, description, and emotional impact. He was surprised. You really understand organization, he said. I was a digital collections technician at a museum, I replied. Maybe that's why I can piece together stories from fragments. At the end of the day, as the sun set behind the tall trees that surrounded the house, we received an unexpected visitor. It was Margaret, neighboring the property next door, a smiling lady, carrying a pumpkin pie fresh out of the oven. I saw the lights on, and thought I needed company, he said, entering without ceremony. She stayed for almost an hour, talking about the old times, about how Gerald was respected in the community, and especially about how Tessa rarely came around, even though she knew about his condition. There was a day when he fell in the backyard, and it was my grandson who helped him. She was inside the house, on the phone, and didn't even hear the screams. I was astonished. That confirmed everything. Margaret, would you mind if I reported this in writing? I asked. Of course not, my dear. Gerald deserves justice. Gerald held my hand tightly. See, even the outside world is on our side. The next morning, before the sun even touched the kitchen windows, we were already up. Gerald drank his coffee slowly, with careful movements, as if each sip carried a symbolism that only he understood. I prepared the table with fresh bread that Margaret had left the night before, and the ginger tea he used to drink to ease his nausea. The atmosphere in that house, despite all the pain and tension, was now marked by a feeling that seemed absent for a long time. Purpose. At 9 a.m. sharp, the doorbell rang. It was Patricia Monroe, Gerald's lawyer, a woman in her early 60s, with a straight posture, hair tied in a tight bun, and an expression that mixed tenderness and steel. When she saw me, she held out her hand. You must be Lucas. I've heard a lot about you over the last few days. Good to have you with us. His voice was firm, almost ceremonial, as if he were always in court. And perhaps he was, at least mentally. He came in, took off his coat, and sat down naturally at the table, like someone who had been part of the family for years. Gerald handed her the sealed letter, and Patricia opened it with a silver opener from her purse. He read in silence, with his eyes going through the text line by line, without rushing, but with the attention of someone looking for every hidden detail. When he finished, he took a deep breath and said, Everything is as we agreed. Lucas will be the medical proxy, secondary heir in designated assets, and moral executor of Gerald's will. This will cause a war, but there are no legal loopholes. Gerald smiled. They will have to swallow hard. Patricia opened her leather briefcase and began organizing the documents. There were a series of signature forms, notarization terms, and the officialization of the change in the will. Everything would need witnesses, and it was then that Margaret, previously warned, arrived to help. She, as a neighbor and longtime friend, would serve as an impartial witness. He signed with pride, and even brought oatmeal cookies. The morning was filled with stamps, signatures, and formal recordings. Patricia recorded a video of Gerald reading part of the will out loud to avoid questioning his sanity or coherence. It was touching to see that man, sick but determined, making each of his desires clear, especially not allowing his death to fuel the greed of those who betrayed him. After lunch, we were alone again. Gerald, exhausted, rested on the sofa with a blanket over his legs, while I typed the final report on the chronology of events. The document brought together everything we had collected so far: medical negligence, financial embezzlement, emotional abandonment. It was more than a file. It was the proof of a silent crime committed under the veil of family ties. During the afternoon, other neighbors began to appear, one by one, as if they had agreed. There was Mark, the retired postman, who said he saw Tessa leave the house numerous times shouting at Gerald. Senior Green, who heard heavy arguments in the early hours of the morning, and even a local caregiver who was called once, but dismissed by Tessa with the justification that we don't have the budget. They all left written, signed reports and allowed me to record them in case it was necessary to present video as evidence. As these witnesses shared their testimonies, the narrative we were putting together was no longer just an accusation. It became a collective memory, a network of truths supported by real people who cared. Gerald watched everything with teary eyes. For years I thought no one saw, that no one cared. I squeezed his shoulder. They care. And now, the world will know too. That night, as I was reviewing the files, I had an idea. What if we make a complete audio-visual record? A kind of personal documentary of yours? Something that can serve not only as legal proof, but as a legacy? Gerald raised his eyebrows. Do you think anyone would watch? I laughed lightly. I think a lot of people need to see it. There are a lot of children being deceived, a lot of elderly people being neglected. This story can open a lot of people's eyes. He was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. Then let's do this, but right, my way. In the days that followed, we recorded video sessions with Gerald narrating his life from the beginning. How he met Tessa's mother, how he tried to build a family even without being Patrick's biological father, and how little by little he was relegated to a corner of the house, of life, of the heart. The recordings were deep, human, painful, but filled with a lucidity that few have at the end of their lives. Gerald made a point of including the good moments as well. He wanted to be remembered whole, not just because of the tragedy. On one of the last nights of that week, we sat on the porch with 2 mugs of hot chocolate, watching the clear, starry sky over the mountains. You know, Lucas, he said, I had a lot of time to think about everything, and I came to the conclusion that what hurt me most wasn't the theft, nor the betrayal. It was the contempt. They looked at me like a burden, and there is no pain more silent than that. I was quiet for a moment, then replied, but now they're going to have to look at you like a mirror, and maybe the reflection is too ugly for them to handle. Gerald smiled, and that's why you're still here. On Friday morning, a week after I arrived at that house, I felt that the air was heavier, as if the minutes passed with twice the weight. Gerald didn't leave the room. When I went to check, he was awake, but haggard, lying on his side, staring into space. When he heard my footsteps, he slowly turned his face and forced a smile. Today is not a good day, he murmured. The pain hit him harder every morning. Even so, he refused the hospital. It wasn't for nothing that we prepared all this, Lucas. If I end up on a stretcher, they'll take the reins again. Here, I'm still the one who decides. It hit me. The idea that such a lucid and strategic man was now dealing with ultimate physical exhaustion. It was a race against time. I called Patricia and explained the situation. She committed to speeding up the final procedures and bringing a trusted assistant, Diana, to assist with palliative care. Gerald still had the strength to whisper, just a little more. After that, you hold the rest. That afternoon, I set up the filming equipment in his room. There was no need for more testimony. It was to record his final message. With his breath now shallower and his skin pale, he looked straight into the lens and spoke. If you're seeing this, it's because I've already said goodbye. But I didn't go away silently. This is my voice, and it will not be ignored. Justice doesn't always come by force. Sometimes it comes with the truth, raw, indisputable. His words cut through the air like clean knives. When the recording ended, I turned off the camera and held his hand for a few minutes. It wasn't a goodbye said out loud, but we both knew it. Diana arrived at the end of the day, a kind woman with compassionate eyes and hands that seemed to have been made to alleviate pain. He took care of Gerald with respect, listened carefully to our instructions about organizing the medications, the routine, the specific instructions not to contact the family under any circumstances. They don't want him alive, she said bluntly, but he's still here, and that's what matters now. With Diana taking over some of the care, I was able to focus on the files. I finished the main video with Gerald's speeches and added images of the house, the documents, and the neighbors' testimonies. I also recorded excerpts of myself, narrating the facts, explaining how I was left there and how everything revealed itself. Not for free exposure, but because, as Gerald said, people only care when they see the pain with their own eyes. On Saturday, Patricia arrived early. I brought the final papers from the bank, which transferred the main assets to the name of the holding company that named Gerald as lifetime manager and me as legal successor. Everything was signed, sealed, and documented with videos and witnesses. Now, even if they try to object, she said, they will lose more than time. They will lose what little dignity they still think they have. In the afternoon, while Gerald was sleeping, I received a notification on my cell phone. It was a post from Tessa on Instagram. She was at a poolside-themed dinner, dressed in summer clothes, holding a glass of white wine. Patrick was in the background, smiling, with his arm outstretched behind her. The caption was an insult to reality. Gratitude for the fresh start, surrounded by love and truth. It didn't hurt me like it used to. For the first time I looked and felt pity, not anger. They were blinded by their own illusion, while here, in the silence of a forgotten house, something truly important was being done. At the end of the night, Gerald woke up with a more severe pain attack. Diana helped him, medicated him, and sat next to him. I watched from the doorway, feeling like this was the beginning of the end. When the pain passed, he called me with a weak gesture. I sat on the edge of the bed. Lucas, promises are like threads. They break easily. But what you did here, that was a bridge. Thank you. My eyes filled with tears. You didn't need to thank me. I needed that bridge too. Sunday dawned with thick fog over the hills. Gerald was quieter than usual, but his eyes were still attentive. Patricia came back, brought more documents from the holdings accounting, and the contact of an investigative journalist friend of hers, in case we decided to take the story to the public. But that's your decision, Lucas, she said. You are now the guardian of all this. You owe no one anything, but you can also change a lot if you decide to act. We were silent with this possibility hanging over us. In the evening, Gerald asked us to turn on an old song, Autumn Leaves, in the instrumental version he loved. We lay down in silence, each with our own thoughts. Diana stood by his side, like a guardian angel. I was looking out the window, and for a second I saw the silhouette of what appeared to be a deer walking in the dim light. Nature surrounded us with a kind of dignity that humans had forgotten. At 4:17 a.m. on Monday morning, Gerald passed away, quietly, no suffering. Diana woke me up with a light touch on the shoulder. He left peacefully, knowing he was not alone. I sat next to the bed for long minutes, in silence. The early morning light barely illuminated the room, but it seemed enough. I took his hand, now cold, and promised in a low voice, I will finish what we started, and no one will erase you from their own history. That morning, the world looked different, not because of the sky, which was still gray and cold, but because inside me there was something irreversibly transformed. Gerald was gone, and with it, an entire chapter of my life had closed. But not the book, not the story. She was just changing hands, from his hands to mine. The first thing I did was call Patricia. She was direct, as always. I've already provided the certificate and the legal procedures. Don't worry about anything. They can't dispute anything, and the medical certificate reinforces that he left peacefully, without intervention, in accordance with the wishes expressed in the video and in the will. His voice, although firm, contained a subtle delicacy, as if he understood the weight that now rested on my shoulders. Diana stayed a few more hours to help with the final preparations. Then he said goodbye with a tight hug. You did more for him in 1 week than the whole family did in years. Don't forget that, Lucas. On Tuesday, the body was cremated as instructed, without a wake, without flowers, without false tears. Just me, Patricia, Diana, and Margaret, the only ones who really cared. Gerald had made it clear, no show. I don't want people pretending to miss people they never felt. And so it was done. As the days went by, I began to put into practice everything we had prepared. First, I sent the legal notices to Tessa's family, the new version of the will, the notice of transfer of assets, the waiver of any direct inheritance on their part. The silence was absolute. No calls, no messages. Until, a week later, Patrick sent a brief, aggressive email threatening to contest. Patricia responded impeccably, attaching the recordings, statements, evidence of negligence, and signed terms. Silence again. This time, definitive. Tessa never spoke out. Not directly, but I saw on social media that the tone of the posts had changed. Optimistic phrases were replaced by vague hints. A starting over is not always easy. A life takes turns. Certain people are ungrateful. But she didn't know, perhaps she would never know, that the greatest ingratitude was hers, towards the man who paid for her college, her cars, and who until the end believed that she could still be better. With everything documented and legally protected, I focused on what I promised Gerald. Tell your story. Not just to alert the world to what he suffered, but to honor his intelligence, his fight, his resistance. I edited the final video carefully, added subtitles, organized the files in chronological order, and prepared the publication. The day I posted the video on a sharing platform, I didn't expect immediate repercussions, but what happened exceeded any expectations. In less than 48 hours, hundreds of comments began appearing. People telling similar stories. Emotional elderly people saying, I was left out too. Children apologizing to their parents. Something there touched people. Maybe because it was real, raw, without emotional makeup. 2 weeks later, I received an invitation from an organization that defends the rights of the elderly. They wanted to use the video as educational material. I authorized it with pride. Soon afterwards, a digital investigative journalism magazine published an article based on the material, bringing to light the discussion about family and financial neglect of the elderly in the United States. Gerald had unintentionally become a symbol. What about me? I moved out of the Asheville house. I didn't want to stay in the same neighborhood where everything seemed contaminated by memories. I went to Vermont, to one of the properties left by Gerald, a small chalet close to the mountains, with a crystal-clear lake at the bottom of the land. There, I found peace. I continued my work with digital files, now as a freelancer, and created a website to help other people report cases of family abuse. What happened to Gerald and me wasn't just a story of abandonment. It was a story of discovery, of reunion with the truth, and above all, of courage. Courage to break the cycle, to say enough, to expose what needs to be seen. Gerald left me with something much greater than possessions or property. He left me with purpose. Today, when I look at that black folder where it all began, I feel gratitude for having been there, for being chosen, for being part of a story that could have gone unnoticed, but is now marked. And if you've made it this far, thanks. In truth, this story isn't just about me or Gerald. It can be about you, about someone you know, about a neighbor, a grandfather, a forgotten aunt. If you liked the video, if something in it touched you, made you think, or even inspired you, subscribe to the channel. Here we share more than stories. We build a community where every voice matters. And please tell us here in the comments, have you ever experienced something similar? Do you know someone who was left aside by their own family? What did you learn from all this? Your experience can help others. Let's create together a space of empathy, listening, and truth. See you in the next video. And remember, even when the world tries to erase you, your story can still be a light for someone.